In this video, we're going to be exploring the capabilities of the XTool P2 by running through a variety of different projects involving various materials. And if you guys aren't familiar with the P2, it's XTool's current flagship model featuring 55 watts of CO2 laser power. And we'll be taking advantage of that CO2 laser by processing some clear acrylic today, which is traditionally challenging for blue diode lasers, but not to worry, I've got a lot more than just clear acrylic for you guys. And as always with these new machines, I'll walk you guys through the unboxing and setup of the XTool P2 for you new P2 owners. And throughout the video, I'm gonna have a bunch of interesting upgrades and accessories sprinkled throughout. And if you currently don't own a P2 and you're looking to get one, right now XTool is running a trade-in program where you can trade in an older machine, and it looks like it doesn't even require you to actually physically send it in, and it doesn't even have to be an XTool branded machine. From what it appears, it looks like you just need to provide proof of purchase and you can get a discount on a new XTool machine. That's pretty compelling. So if you guys want more details, check the video description down below. Now, we've got a lot to get through in this video, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get started. We'll begin by unboxing the XTool P2, and this thing is big, banana for scale. The machine itself measures about 40 inches wide and about 24 inches deep. And for those of you guys working in metric, that's about a meter wide and 60 centimeters deep. Luckily, it comes very well packaged, so all of that machine arrived in one piece. I would recommend removing all of the contents stored away inside of the machine, which are the accessories and some material, to actually reduce the weight so you can lift this thing up onto a table. I would recommend that you get somebody to help you to do that. After awkwardly performing this two-person lift all by myself, we can have a quick peek at what's inside. And right away I got the impression that this is a pretty serious and high quality machine. Everything is finished in satin black, and even the lid is supported with these nice gas struts. Now, in order for us to remove the rest of the foam and get the gantry freed up, you'll find on the left and right hand side, right below the gantry, there are some stickers indicating that you should remove these thumb screws and the metal brackets securing the gantry in place. These brackets kept the gantry from sliding around during shipping and made sure that your machine arrived to you undamaged. On the brackets themselves, one of the things I noticed is that they have rubber pads on them, and I assume that's to prevent the brackets from scratching the finish on the machine during shipping. It's small details like this that I really appreciate, and it gives me the impression that XTool really takes pride in their product. Now we can manually move the gantry forward by hand and remove the foam, and then turn our attention to the laser bed area right at the front of the machine, and you'll find a tag that we can remove, which will expose a Phillips head screw that we can remove, and now we can pull the bottom tray out from the bottom of the P2. I'll remove the sample pieces of acrylic and the last sheet of foam. Then we can slide the tray back and make sure you put that screw back in place. Then you can work your way around the machine and remove all of the stickers and protective film. And along the back edge of the inside of the P2, you'll find more of those tags, and below that, we can begin to remove all of the socket head cap screws. At the back of the machine, there are 5 more M3 socket head cap screws that we need to remove so that we can get the top cover off of the P2 so we can access the water fill area. Now, even with the screws removed, it still feels like there are some clips holding this panel in place, so you do have to carefully pop it off. Now we can see the coolant reservoir as well as the laser tube itself. And now we're ready to go through the coolant fill procedure, and I would recommend that you reference the manual, because depending on your operating environment, you may or may not need to mix in the included antifreeze. In my case, I'm working indoors and it never gets really that cold in here, so the first fill is 1100 milliliters of distilled water, and then I can deactivate the emergency stop, plug the machine in, and turn the machine on. The water will start to circulate, and after the machine has been running for a while with the cap off, the air has been purged from the system, you can add the last 300 milliliters of water, replace the back panel, put all the screws back in place, and you're ready to go. But not first without considering ventilation. So at the back of the P2, there is a 3-inch port. It comes with this hose and the clamp, but I've developed a low profile 90-degree adapter that will allow me and you to upgrade to 4-inch ductwork. Personally, I like using 4-inch or 100mm ductwork because it's compatible with these very large inline fans. The model that I have here features a speed controller with 10 different speeds and a very convenient remote. And I'll put a link to this model down in the video description down below, as well as a link to the 90-degree hose adapter. I've routed the exhaust out my window, and I created this custom window frame panel with a piece of wood where the outside edges are sealed with rubber garage door seal. This setup is working quite well for me, although if you guys are looking to filter your fumes from the XTool P2, XTool also offers a fume filtration system, which I'll also link to down in the video description below, along with a link to an air quality sensor if you're looking to monitor the safety of your workspace. In a previous video, I walked you guys through the basics of XTool Creative Space 2.0, and so if you're watching this video, I assume you've watched the previous one and you have a basic understanding of how the software works. In that previous video, together we created some amazing looking edge-lit acrylic artwork. It was displayed on my LED acrylic stand kit. You can find it on my website, embracemaking.com. Now in this video, we're going to run through a bunch more examples with a larger variety of materials. And so we're going to get the XTool P2 connected to our computer. And the first example that we're going to do here is a polyurethane mouse pad. When working with this kind of material, you're going to want to make sure that it is not made of vinyl. Some fake leathers are made of vinyl and you do not want to be lasering that. You can end up with toxic gases. Be sure that the material you're using is in fact polyurethane based. Alternatively, you can also safely process real leather, so that's also an option if you can get your hands on some nice full grain leather to work with. But for this PU leather, I'm going to hop into the XTool Material Easy Set library, which you can now access directly right inside of XTool Creative Space. I'm going to select this artificial leather, and on this yellow mouse pad, I'm going to add my logo. When I click on the logo on the right hand side, you can see that the material settings are directly set, and I've got the processing type set to engrave, and because of that easy set library, I've got the power set to 12% and the speed set to 600 millimeters per second, and those are the default settings right from XTool. One visual check that I like to do to make sure my material is lined up correctly is to just draw a rectangle in the corner of the material, and as long as the edges line up with that rectangle, then I know my material is square inside of the workspace. And because this is a lighter colored material, I'm going to make a slight adjustment to the power, and I'm going to bump that up to 16% power so I get a slightly darker engrave. And finally, before starting the job, I'm going to use the autofocus. I'm going to click on the area right where I want to engrave, and you can see the P2 has measured the thickness of a material at 1.9 millimeters, which seems correct. Then I'll make a quick last second decision to reposition my graphic so that it's evenly spaced from the top and left edge, and we'll process the job. If you guys are regular viewers of my channel, you'll know that I've been using these XTool products for a while now, and I really enjoy seeing how far XTool has come with the Creative Space software, making it really easy to get started. And with the integration of the Easy Set material library, it gives you a reference point for such a wide variety of materials that it takes out so much of the guesswork in getting started with a new material. That being said, various colors of material may react to the laser a bit different. So in this case with the yellow, I was hoping for a slightly darker engrave, and you can see here that it's a little bit on the light side. With the same settings on a darker material, the engraving actually came out looking darker. This is the exact same brand of mouse pad, same material, just in a different color. And on my logo, the one side there looks a little bit lighter than the rest of the logo, and I believe that's because the material was lifting. For this piece here, I should have used the included material hold down clamps. One of the best things about a CO2 laser is the ability to process clear acrylics, and unlike diode lasers, you won't need any special coatings or tricks. And my favorite thing to do with clear acrylic is to make edge-lit signs. And so what I have here is one of these very generic edge-lit sign kits that I'll put a link to down in the video description below. They come with an RGB LED base, and they can be powered by battery or through USB cable. They include a remote and one of these 4mm cast acrylic panels. I'm going to remove the plastic protective coating off of one side of the acrylic, and I'm going to position this inside of my workspace. With these smaller workpieces, it can be a little more difficult to get things squared up properly, so I came up with these alignment clips. They come in a pack of 2, and you can find them on my website, embracemaking.com, and they engage with the slats inside of the P2 workspace. You can put 2 of them down side by side, and then you can grab a steel framing square like this one here. This one's 8 inches by 12 inches, and the magnets embedded in the clips will hold on to the square securely and allow you to slide it side by side and up and down for maximum flexibility when positioning your workpiece. Now, obviously using the camera positioning system in XTool Creative Space, you can line up your graphic to a misaligned workpiece, but I do find that rather annoying when I'm having to try and align my graphics and rotating them, let's say 2 degrees at a time. If you're running your machine for business purposes, time is money and efficiency is important. Using an alignment tool like this prevents you from having to rotate your graphic for every single job that you run, and if you're processing multiple pieces at a time, you can space them out evenly using the measurements right on the framing square itself. This allows you to run batches with minimal setup time, and if you had a longer ruler, you could put even more material in there. Just always remember before you run your job to remove the ruler and remove the clips so they do not make contact with any of the moving parts inside of the P2. For this example, I'm only going to be processing one of these panels, and so I've lined it up using my alignment tool, and then I'll attempt to use the autofocusing feature on the surface of this clear acrylic. And you can see it comes back with a thickness of 1.1 millimeters, which is not correct. The autofocus can sometimes struggle with certain materials or finishes, and so a trick here is to just put a piece of white paper on top of your material, then use the autofocusing tool, and you can see now it reads 4.1 millimeters, which is correct. Then I removed the piece of paper and refreshed the camera view, and now I can hop into the material library and find the listing for transparent acrylic. There is no listing for 4mm thick transparent acrylic, only for 3mm, but this isn't going to be a problem because we're only going to be engraving. So in this case, the thickness is more or less irrelevant, and I'll leave the default settings for engraving, but if you did want to change it, you can just click around inside of the material test card there, and it'll automatically import those settings into your job. In my previous video covering the basics of XTool Creative Space 2.0, I didn't cover the AI image generation model. By clicking the AI button in the left-hand toolbar, it opens up the image generation tool, and I'm going to just type in something like kitten with a rainbow. I've selected the style as line art, and you can see down at the bottom that you're given a certain amount of credits, and each time you generate an image, you'll be deducted a certain amount of credits. If you're happy with one of the generated images and you hover over the picture down in the bottom right hand corner, you can import the picture right into your workspace. I would generally recommend going with line art because of the high contrast of the black sketch on the white or gray background. This makes it very easy to use the trace image tool in the bottom right hand corner and convert your raster image into a vector outline. You can play around a little bit with the sliders controlling the fuzziness, threshold, denoising, and smoothness to get the result that you want. You can hit save and just be sure that you go into the layers and you either hide or delete the underlying raster image below. If you don't want to delete the underlying raster image, the other option is to select it in the layer panel, and on the right hand side, just deselect output. That's what I've done, and then I've hidden it, and now I've selected my vector outline, and I can reposition it as well as resize it. I'll place it directly over top of my workpiece, and in the options on the right hand side, I'll select engrave. If you look closely at the image, you can see the space between the vector outline has now been filled in, and I'm going to make sure here that I reset my thickness to 4mm because when I had selected the material in the Easy Set library, it changed it to 3mm. Then I can use the secondary camera to capture a close view of my workpiece and double check the position of my graphic before sending it off to the P2 for final processing. And this is actually the first time that I've used the AI generated artwork inside of XTool Creative Space, and I was rather happy with the output considering the minimal amount of prompts that I gave it. And honestly, I'd have to use it a lot more before recommending it or giving it a final verdict, but it's worth at least exploring considering that you get a certain number of free credits. And as you would expect from a 55 watt CO2 laser, the P2 makes pretty quick work of this clear acrylic. I thought this piece here turned out quite nice. There are some slightly finer lines around the whiskers and hairs of the cat, as well as in some of those lines of the rainbow, But truthfully, this wasn't a very challenging graphic for a machine like the P2, so it came out as you should expect from a machine this expensive. And while I'm cycling through the colors on this LED base, just a reminder that I've put a link to these things down in the video description below. Go check it out. Now, because that first example was so easy and the workflow was so seamless, I decided to do one more. For this one here, I found a black and white image of everyone's favorite mustachioed Italian brothers, but unfortunately it's a pretty low resolution image. And so what I'm going to do here is use a few of the tools inside of XTool Creative Space, like the edit image, and I'm going to delete the white background. I was also trying to delete the black border, but part of that border was attached to the dinosaur's nose. So using the erase tool, I could erase the part that was attached to his nose, and then using the magic wand, I could delete the border. Then I can use some of the adjustment tools and adjust the sharpness so that when I hop in to trace the image, it's easier to trace. And so again, I'm going to play around with some of these sliders and make sure there are no strange artifacts in the outline of the tracing. Now this might take a minute or two to do, but as you can see that even with a low resolution image, with the right steps, you can still capture all of those details in a vector tracing. Now the rest of this process is the same as I had done with the previous example with that rainbow cat, and you can see that I've hidden the raster image below it, and I can take the vector tracing output, go ahead and select engrave, and all of the interior between those lines has now been filled in. Now one thing I always mention in all of my videos is that sometimes I include these recognizable characters or even recognizable logos, but be sure that you are not selling these kinds of items. I'm certainly not in the business of selling items with copyrighted logos or registered trademarks, and you shouldn't be either. That is, unless of course you've purchased the license to do so. And with that disclaimer out of the way and a short wait later, we can see how this piece turned out. Now one thing I didn't mention in the previous example is that you will have to clean up the part once it comes out of the machine, and this can simply be done with some water and a very soft cloth. Acrylic is generally very easy to scratch, so you want to be as careful as possible, but once it's clean, it looks incredible. The possibilities of these acrylic signs is as endless as your imagination, or perhaps the abilities of AI image generation. Now we can have a look at a vastly different material like aluminum, and unfortunately bare aluminum cannot be marked with a CO2 laser, at least not without the use of some sort of marking material. However, it is very good at marking coated aluminum, such as powder coated or even anodized aluminum. And I've got this small screwdriver tool here, and based on the texture, I do have a feeling that it's coated and it's not anodized. I used a set of digital calipers to manually measure the thickness at 17 millimeters, and I'm going to use the close capture camera to get in nice and close on the handle of this screwdriver, because I'm going to be engraving some text right on that thin portion in the middle. I'm giving this a try because it's a very small space and I want to test the accuracy of the camera positioning, and I want to see if I can get this text right in the middle of the screwdriver. Within XTool Creative Space, you do have some tools here at your disposal for creating and manipulating text. So you have different fonts and different weights available, as well as of course the different text sizes. You can edit all of those in the toolbar on the right hand side, and in the bottom right hand corner we can use the plus and minus symbols there to zoom way in on the material and make sure that I'm happy with the positioning before going over and selecting engrave. And you can see now that the text is filled in, and in the material we're going to go into the easy set material library and try and find something suitable. I didn't see what I was looking for in the drop down menu, so we'll filter it here by metal and by the machine, which will be the 55 watt P2, and we'll take a browse through some of these materials. And as I stated earlier, I don't think this is anodized. I have a feeling that it's coated more like a stainless steel water bottle. Of course, it's not stainless, it is actually aluminum, but I'm going to still go with the stainless steel coating. And that's because the laser power is going to be modulated to burn off something like this powder coat. And so the result here is not that you're actually marking the substrate material underneath, which would be the aluminum, you're just burning off that top coating. And after selecting that material, I want to point out here that I made a mistake. And I want to point this out so that you guys don't make the same mistake. Every time that you select a material in the Easy Set material library, it's going to change the thickness of the material to whatever the preset is. And you can see here that it is set to 0 millimeters. I'm going to change that over to 17. But somewhere in the back and forth between changing the material and the material thickness, I didn't refresh the camera view. I was too eager to get the job processed, and immediately I recognized my mistake once I noticed that the engraving was not happening in the center of the screwdriver. I canceled the job, and because this screwdriver is a hexagonal shape, I was able to just rotate it to a new face and then correct my mistake. So in here, I've refreshed the camera view, and you'll see the screwdriver jump around a little bit, and that's because, like I said, I had to rotate it to a new face. But anytime you adjust the material thickness, just be sure to refresh the view to make sure that the positioning of your graphics is correct before you go ahead and process the job. Now we can try this job again and find out how accurate the XTool P2 is without user error involved. This time around, things were looking pretty good, and I let the job run until completion. The result was perfect, and the text was nicely centered on the screwdriver, and those material settings for the stainless steel coated tumbler worked very nicely on this coated aluminum. It would appear my hunch was correct, and this is possibly powder coated and not anodized, but either way, the text came out flawless looking, unlike the first attempt, which ended up way off, as I explained why earlier. Next, I tried to find something that was just regular black anodized, or just anodized any color really, and all I could find was this aluminum bar, but I know that it's not regular anodized. This is actually a hard anodized surface. Now, I'm not an expert in this type of treatment, but I do know that hard anodizing is a lot more durable than regular anodizing. And truthfully, I'm not entirely sure what that means in terms of engraving something, especially with a CO2 laser. So I guess that's all the more reason to experiment and find out. When I set up this example here, for some reason in the material library, I couldn't find the black anodized aluminum. It wasn't until later when I'm editing this video that I could go back and find it. But regardless, I selected blue, and you can see the power and speed settings are the same between blue and black. So ultimately it didn't really matter. I just wanted to explain to you guys why over in the material setting there, you can see a blue anodized dog tag. Now the thickness of this bar plus the blue piece of acrylic below it is 22 millimeters, and the reason for that piece of acrylic is just so we can see the black bar a lot better. I'll use the close capture camera to position the graphic right in the middle of the bar, and then I'll refresh the camera one more time just for good measure to make sure that I'm not making the same mistake that I did before with that screwdriver, and we can send this off to process. Now this is the first and only hard anodized part that I've ever engraved, so I'm really only working off of one data point here, but you can see that in the engraving, it looks like the logo and text itself has been duplicated and shifted a little bit. It's a pretty strange phenomenon, and I'm wondering if perhaps the laser was reflected back somehow through the mirrors and then duplicated on a different angle. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below, as I've done lots of regular anodized parts before and I've never seen this come up, so I'd love to hear what you guys think. Now we can take a look at probably the most popular material to process, and that'll be wood, and we're going to be using this very powerful and convenient software, which I'll put a link to down in the video description below. It allows you to quickly and very easily create these vector path maps with a variety of features such as roads, highways, topographical contour lines, railroads, airports, bodies of water, lakes, rivers, etc., etc. You can customize any of these features with varying line widths, colors, borders, and more to create the map of your choosing. Very soon I'm going to be releasing a full walkthrough video on how to use this software. Now it is subscription based, so you will have to sign up. They do offer free trials, but I think you'll quickly realize that it is worth the cost. And if you guys have been paying attention on Etsy or some of these other sellers' websites, these laser maps go for quite a lot of money, and it's a pretty lucrative market. So be sure to check the video description down below for a link to where you guys can access this software. In this demonstration, you guys can see that I've generated my laser map files and I've brought them all into Adobe Illustrator to add some additional text and some custom features where then I can take those SVG files and bring them into XTool Creative Space. And because these files are all vector paths, there's absolutely no issue with resizing them or scaling them. And as you guys can see on the left-hand side in the layer toolbar, I've got the map separated into 3 different layers. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to duplicate the topmost layer, so that red layer is getting duplicated. Then I'll take the copy and I'll move it to a blue layer on top. And the reason that I'm doing this is because for this top layer, I want one of those layers to be a filled engrave, and then the uppermost layer I'm going to set to score. The purple layer is just a rectangle around the whole design, so that will be set to cut. So it's going to cut out the whole design when it's done. And the bottommost layer, the black layer, is just the engraving of all of those topographical contour lines. I want the top layer with the text and winding road to be a darker engrave, so I'll use the Material Easy Set library to select a darker engrave. And so the intent here is to have all of the lettering and the border and the winding road much darker than the contour lines in the background, and to also have a nice scoring around the engraved letters and road so that it just makes things pop a little bit more. Now, it did take me 2 tries to get this right. You'll see in this first example here that I went a little too light on the road as well as the engraving of the letters, but on the second try, this is the desired effect that I was looking for. Now, most people making these maps are cutting and layering the wood for a more 3D effect, but in this case, I just wanted to do something a little different, and with a $10 IKEA frame, I think it looks pretty good. And in this next example, I want to do something even more different with these vector maps. And instead of using wood, we can switch back to acrylic, and I think we can make ourselves a really eye-catching edgelit map. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I am going to have a full walkthrough video on this laser map making software coming up very soon, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss it. But right now, I'll very quickly summarize what I'm doing here. Essentially, I've picked my location, which is going to be London, England, and you guys can see that I've changed the ratio of my map. So I've selected a 2:3 ratio style map, and now I can start adding my layers with the various features. So the first one I'll add is just some water. I can change some of the layer properties, such as making the water blue, just so it's easier to visualize, and then change the visibility of those layers and kind of see what I'm working with here. I can select certain features within the layer itself and delete them or hide them. Above that, I can add a layer containing all of the roads, tunnels, and bridges, and I'm going to reduce the line width of all of these roads because the intent here is that this particular layer is going to get combined with the water layer, and it's not going to be my foreground, which is going to be engraved on clear acrylic, and the foreground will be the thing that's edgelit. So this is just going to be in the background. Then what I've done is duplicated this project so I can modify the background roads layer. I'm going to be removing all of the minor roadways and smaller streets so that all we're left with is the major highways and primary roads. Then I'm going to change their line widths and I'm going to thicken them up so that these primary roads really stand out and pop because this is going to be the foreground. I'll also add in a border to nicely frame the foreground, and then my files are ready to be exported. And as the output files are being generated, I just want to mention again that I'm skipping through this process very quickly because I am going to do a full-length walkthrough of this software. This video is long enough as it is, and I'm sure you guys have been skipping through it, so in case you missed that, there's a link down in the video description to this software. And for now, this is just a very high-level overview of the software, as well as my strategy to the design of this particular map. And as with the previous example, I generally take all of my files, bring them into Adobe Illustrator, where I can add a bit of extra flair, such as the name of the location, or perhaps even a flag, or some sort of relevant symbol. After that, I can set up my material inside of the P2 workspace using my alignment clips. Then I can bring the final design into XTool Creative Space, and you can see I've brought in all of the layers, and I'm going to align them with respect to one another, and then I'm going to align them on top of my workpiece. In this case, I'm going to be starting with my foreground layer, so it's going to be those thicker roads along with the London, England text. And this is going to be going onto a 3mm piece of clear acrylic. And I'm going to be using the close capture camera to take extra special care that all of these layers are perfectly lined up with the workpiece. As I capture close-up pictures of the corners and edges of the clear acrylic, you can see that I make the background layer visible again, and that's got all of the minor and smaller roads on it, and I adjust its size along with the size of the foreground layer so they're always proportional to one another. And although the background layer is not getting engraved onto this clear piece of acrylic, it will be getting engraved onto another piece of acrylic of the exact same size. And so that is where I want the background layer to extend to the outermost edges of the workpiece, whereas this foreground layer is going to be inset a little bit. And before we send this job off to the P2, one of the things I want to show you guys here is this electric compressed air gun that I use to clean my acrylic pieces before processing them. I really love this thing because you don't have to rub the acrylic, and if you guys have worked with clear acrylic before, you know it can scratch pretty easily. It's really powerful and it can remove all of the dust and particles that get stuck to the acrylic, and I don't have to keep buying cans of compressed air. I'll put a link to this thing in the video description down below. If you're new to working with clear acrylic, the other thing I want to briefly talk about here is the difference between cast and extruded acrylic. What you're looking at right here is an engraving test that was done on what was advertised as cast acrylic, and although it still engraves and looks a little bit frosted, when putting it below or next to actual cast acrylic, you can see the difference. The engraving on the cast acrylic looks a lot more frosted and white, and then when you try and edge light the extruded acrylic, you can see that the result is disappointing. When edge lit, real cast acrylic that's been engraved looks really bright like this. Unfortunately, I had to waste a lot of my valuable time buying material that was advertised as cast off of Amazon, only to find out that it was actually extruded material. I don't want you guys to have to go through the same struggle, so check the video description down below for links to the good stuff. With that public service announcement out of the way, let's get on to finishing the rest of this map. After a bit of cleanup with some water and just a very soft cloth, you can see the engraved layer turns out really nice, and even very tiny and small details such as the sword inside of the City of London flag was captured perfectly by the P2. The background layer is going to get engraved on some red transparent acrylic, and with the background layer I'm going to go through more or less the same process that I did with the foreground, where I'm going to be using the close capture camera to align the graphic with the edges of the material. Now this piece of red acrylic is taller than the clear acrylic, and you'll see that I have a line on top of the graphic, and I'm going to change the output there and make sure that it's set to cut. This cut line will part the red acrylic so it's the same size as the clear piece. For this particular material, the best option that I could find inside of the Easy Set material library is this 3mm ruby red translucent acrylic. And before jumping into the Easy Set material library, I had the background layer with those minor roads selected, so I'm going to change the processing type here to engrave. Then I'll select open in XCS to import those settings. The settings for the engraving are now taken care of, and even the cut line has automatically inherited the cut settings for that ruby red translucent acrylic. During the processing of this material, I noticed that the red acrylic produced a lot more particulate dust than the clear stuff, but it was still very easy to clean off, again with just some water and a soft cloth. It's not often that I work with this color of acrylic, but I thought the engraving turned out really nice, and the contrast between the white frosted look on the red looks sharp. All of the small roads and streets were captured beautifully, and this should make for a very interesting background to the edge lit foreground. I mounted these pieces in my LED acrylic stand kit that you can find on my website embracemaking.com, and you can really see how uniform the lighting is across this graphic when using an actual high quality LED bar. Now in person, the background is a bit more noticeable than it appears on camera, but truthfully, I was hoping that it would be more noticeable still. Ultimately, this design and concept was a bit of an experiment because I wanted to do something different. As I mentioned earlier, most people making these maps resort to using wood, but I actually think this thing turned out looking pretty good. For the final example, I'm going to show you guys one more map that I created, and instead of using acrylic, we're going to be using some 60-pound paper cardstock. In most videos featuring the P2, you've probably seen people cutting through very thick materials. And since you already know that it can do that, I figured let's try something thinner and more delicate and see how the P2 handles this kind of material with very intricate details. As with the previous example, I used the laser map making software to create my vector paths, and then I used Adobe Illustrator to again add some text and the country flag. I'll bring in each of my map layers into XTool Creative Space one layer at a time, and in this case, I'm going to be using different colored pieces of paper cardstock for each individual layer. You can see in the background here that I have a piece of green paper cardstock, and for this layer here, I'm going to be cutting out the section which will outline the water. In the final product, there will be a layer of blue paper cardstock behind this green layer, and the blue will show through the cut section, and that will of course represent blue water. Now at the time of the making of this video, within the XTool Easy Set material library, there doesn't appear to be any presets for the P2 when it comes to paper cardstock. When you filter and search for paper, you'll likely come across corrugated cardboard, which is much thicker than this cardstock, and nothing comes up even when you search for craft or craft paper. However, if you use the old method of just visiting the XTool website where they still have the material settings page up, and you select the XTool P2, you can select paper and scroll all the way down to the bottom, and you will find settings in there for craft paper. So it seems like XTool has yet to add these to the Easy Set material library, but when in doubt, you can always go back and visit the XTool website the old school way. I'm sure it won't be long before these settings are available in the Easy Set material library, but for now, I'll just manually type them in. To do this, you can just click on the Easy Set panel button, and then the panel comes up, and you can type in the power as a percentage and the speed in millimeters per second. So in this case, for cutting this cardstock, I went with 80% power at 60 millimeters per second. Now in my design, this green layer is a bit special because it's not only going to get cut, but it's also going to get engraved. I'm going to try engraving all of these smaller roads and details onto the green layer, which represents the land, and the engraving settings I also found from the traditional XTool settings library. And it would appear that these settings are in fact very accurate because the cuts came out extremely clean. You can see down there in those small bodies of water that those very tiny looking peninsulas were not even burned away. There were no areas of the design that were still attached to the original piece of paper, and everything broke away really clean, which was nice because I didn't want to have to be picking away at the paper and potentially tearing it. As I described earlier, there will be a solid piece of blue cardstock behind the green, and of course this represents the water. And eventually I'll glue all of these pieces together, which will provide the entire design with a little more rigidity. Now above those layers, I'm going to place some black cardstock, and this is where I'm going to cut out all of the roads. I'm also going to use the little button in the Easy Set panel to save my settings, and so I'm going to be calling them 60-pound cardstock because of course that's the material that I'm using. Now this design here has a lot more smaller pieces to be cut out, and unfortunately one of the things that I experienced during this process was some of those pieces not falling through the slats, and they'll stick up above the workpiece, potentially coming in contact with the laser head. So I was having to frequently pause the job, open the lid, and then pull away those small pieces sticking up. Eventually I missed one and the laser head knocked the whole workpiece and ruined the job. On my second attempt, I used the material hold down clips that come with the XTool P2, and this ensured that my workpiece wouldn't move. Out of abundance of caution, I still had to frequently pause the job and remove those stray pieces of paper, but at least the second time around I was successful. Other than that, it was just a matter of cutting out two more layers, one in red and one in white. These two layers will make up the front border and frame of this map, and that's where I put in the text with the city name of Geneva, as well as the Swiss flag. After sandwiching all of the layers together and putting it inside of another inexpensive IKEA frame, this is what the final product looks like. Working with paper cardstock is a lot less expensive than working with acrylic, but it still looks nice as a final product, or you could even use it to prototype your design before moving on to more expensive materials. If you're looking for a more 3D effect, the other option is to layer the paper cardstock on top of wood cut out of the same shape, or you could paint the wood, or even use laser-safe foam to create these shapes and layer them. So I hope that gives you guys a pretty good idea of what the XTool P2 is capable of. Now, it can process a lot more materials than what I showed in this video, and it has a lot more advanced software features, but there just isn't enough time to cover it all in one video, so I'll be covering those in some future videos. After using the P2 for a while now, I've been impressed with the general capabilities of the machine, as well as its accuracy, overall build quality, and my other CO2 laser is an older K40 machine that I purchased a few years ago, and there's just a huge difference between these two machines. Now, I'm not going to sit here and do a head-to-head comparison between an older K40 and the XTool P2. The P2 is a much more expensive machine, and you would rightfully expect that it's going to be better in just about every measure. And if you're considering the P2, you're likely a business owner doing laser cutting and engraving. And so I would say you'd have to look at this machine like an investment into a business related tool, unless of course you're just a hobbyist who likes really expensive hobbies. That being said, if you are the creative type and you're looking to bring your ideas to life, or perhaps start a small business, or if you're already a business owner and you're looking to add to your tool set, I don't think the P2 is a machine that you can go wrong with. It's got a pretty big working area considering that it's enclosed. And if you guys need more space or you need to work with bigger materials, XTool offers the automatic feeder system, so you can work with bigger stuff. But even smaller items inside of the P2, they do still work very well because it's got the camera that captures everything, but also has the close capture camera where you can get in nice and close and very accurately place your graphics. I briefly mentioned a moment ago that there are so many more advanced features with the P2 that I couldn't even get into in this video, such as the curved surface engraving, and other things like the XTool Creative Space software in general keep getting updates over time. The recent integration of the Material Easy Set library makes it easier than ever to just select your material, select the settings you want, and import them into your project with very little wasted time making test cards on new materials that perhaps you aren't familiar with. So one of my very few complaints with the P2 is that it is a really big machine and it's quite heavy. So it weighs about 100 pounds or 45 kilograms. And during that initial unboxing and setup process, you're definitely going to want somebody to help you lift it up onto your table because it is very awkward and you could hurt yourself, or you could drop the machine and damage it. Now, it's also a bit of a silly complaint on my behalf at the same time, because if you do buy the machine or you want a machine that has a large processing area, it kind of has to be physically big. Plus, it's got the laser tube in the back, so it becomes a little bit of a packaging issue, and I think XTool doesn't really have too many options there. Just the machine has to be big. And the other thing is, even if they could somehow drop a bunch of weight off of it, I know I'd probably be guilty of it, where if I picked it up and it felt light and flimsy, I'd probably be wondering what I paid so much money for if it feels so cheap. So in this case, I feel like you really can't have your cake and eat it too. And so with the size being what it is, I would recommend, if you get a P2, to get some kind of rolling workbench, because smaller workbenches just generally don't have the required depth to put the P2 on, plus the exhaust hose in the back. If you had some sort of rolling workbench, you could pull it away from the wall, and then you can deal with the exhaust ventilation at the back, and it'd be easy to roll the machine around and have access to it from all sides. One other thing that maybe XTool can look into for future versions of the P2 is a small onboard touchscreen. Now, you don't need to have your laptop or computer tethered by USB to the P2 currently. It works perfectly fine over Wi-Fi. But the small screen on the top of the P2 right now only gives you some very basic information as to what's going on. And with that screen, you can't really control it. So I'd like to see perhaps in the future if they can integrate some sort of small control screen, something that maybe is found commonly on like a 3D printer, to perform some basic tasks right from the top of the P2. I think that'd be an interesting feature. So that's it for this video. I'm definitely gonna have more P2 content coming in the future. Be sure to check the video description down below for all of the relevant links to things that I've referenced in this video here. Also, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the upcoming laser map maker tutorial video, and visit my website, embracemaking.com, where you'll find lots of interesting P2 upgrades and accessories and a whole lot more. Thanks for watching.